As you know, tomorrow is the feast of the Immaculate Conception, Holy Day of Obligation. Hope to see all of you at church either tonight or tomorrow. I'm sorry. Got too many things in my hands. The Feast of the Immaculate Conception is important to us, and I think everybody in this room probably is very, very familiar with what it's all about. But you know, there are a lot of people that don't quite understand it, so just a quick review. The Immaculate Conception is when Mary was conceived in the womb of her parents. And there's a good reason for that, and the Catholic Church defined it so in those dates that were mentioned. You know, when the angel Gabriel announced to Mary, he used a term that we say a lot. Hail Mary, full of grace. Well, how do you get full of grace? Well, if you're full of grace, you're without sin. And God knew that he was going to make this vessel, Mary, incarnate with Jesus. And you probably have been out on the golf course or the tennis courts and you've heard somebody say, oh, for Christ's sakes. Well, you know what? That's exactly why the Immaculate Conception was defined by the Church. It's for Christ's sake. Christ, the Word of God made flesh, coming into our lives. There had to be a vehicle that was worthy of that, and the Catholic Church defined that. In this case, Pope Pius IX defined that to be a fact, to be believed by all Catholics, which leads us to this notion of papal infallibility. The Vatican I took that subject up, again, Pope Pius IX. They didn't quite get the job done, as there were some problems, as that video showed. But Vatican II, they completed the job of the definitiveness of papal infallibility and, of course, church infallibility, the magisterium. And that, again, is a somewhat misunderstood term amongst maybe some, in many cases, our Protestant brethren. They don't quite understand what the church is talking about there. And I've heard it even said recently, oh, well, you know, Peter and Paul had an argument, and Paul had to rebuke Peter, so therefore he couldn't be infallible. Well, there's nobody that said that he's infallible all the time, or perhaps a lot of the time. But very specifically, when a pope teaches ex cathedra, which is from the chair of Peter, he's teaching in faith or morals, that is a dogma, and that is to be believed by the faithful. And popes don't teach ex cathedra very often, by the way. Very rarely. In fact, in our lifetime, you might recall the Assumption of Mary was taught as a doctrine in 1950 by Pope Pius XII. And in that case, the definition was that Mary, through the grace of God, was assumed, body and soul, into heaven. Again, for us to believe as Catholics, totally. And only a few other instances since in our lifetime where this has happened. And many of the people that have misunderstandings about this think that, well, every time some pope opens his mouth, he has to be speaking, you know, infallibly. Well, of course, that certainly is not the case. But when one of our popes, and of course now we have Benedict XVI, and he recently has elevated Pope John Paul II to the status of, what did he
Blessed.
That is, of course, another case where he is speaking for all of us to believe. When somebody is made blessed, when somebody is elevated to the status of a saint. But when it comes to those very peculiar situations, like the Immaculate Conception, oh, that's hard to believe, or the Assumption of Mary, or the canon of the Bible, you know, these are moments in time where our church is saying, definitively, I have the authority, and I'm going to do it. And this is for the faithful to believe. And that's all there is to that message.
A plus, Bob.
Let's go to our meeting.